Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into a genuinely massive chapter in your history textbook, Nationalism in India. We're going to build complete conceptual mastery of this entire era right from the ground up. Now, we aren't just going to sit here memorizing dates. No way. We're going to really understand the why and the how behind the Indian national movement. Think of this whole period as a grand, epic story. You've got rising action, intense conflicts, brilliant strategies, and a diverse cast of literally millions of people. To make this huge historical epoch super easy to digest, we're breaking it down into 6 logical steps. We'll start with the WWI economic crisis, move to the idea of Satyagraha, the Rowlatt Act and Jallianwala Bagh, then look at differing strands of rebellion, the famous Salt March, and finally, the limits of civil disobedience. All right, let's get right into it. Section 1, the WWI economic crisis and the catalyst for change. Okay, so every great story needs an inciting incident, right? For the Indian national movement, that incident was a staggering, heartbreaking loss of life. Between 1918 and 1921, 12 to 13 million people in India perished. And this was primarily due to severe famines and a devastating influenza epidemic. I want you to just think about that number for a second. It's a heavy statistic. This wasn't just some abstract political struggle happening in the background. For everyday people, it was literally a matter of sheer survival. This immense suffering absolutely set the emotional stage for the rebellion that was about to unfold. People were desperate. And the colonial government's response? Well, it kind of just made things a whole lot worse. Let's break down this economic crisis a bit more. Britain was off fighting a massive war in Europe, and they essentially made India pay for it. To finance their war loans, the British raised customs duties and introduced an income tax. Imagine the prices of everything you buy doubling in just 5 years, because that's exactly what happened between 1913 and 1918. It led to extreme hardship for common folks. But you know what was perhaps the most deeply resented policy of all? Forced recruitment. The colonial state literally went into rural villages and forced young men to join the British Army. That term, forced recruitment, is definitely one you want to remember. It caused widespread, intense anger. People endured all this trauma, hoping that eventually their hardships would end once the war was over. But guess what? That didn't happen. The stage was perfectly set for a totally new kind of leadership. Section 2, the idea of Satyagraha, a novel mode of struggle. Right at this critical boiling point, Mahatma Gandhi returns to India from South Africa. It's January 1915, and he brings with him a totally novel method of mass agitation. He called it Satyagraha. Now, Satyagraha literally emphasizes the power of truth and the fundamental need to search for truth. It basically says, look, if your cause is true and your struggle is against injustice, you absolutely do not need physical force to fight your oppressor. It's not about vengeance at all. A Satyagrahi wins by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor, persuading them to see the truth. Gandhi firmly believed that this dharma, this moral duty of nonviolence, could be the ultimate glue to unite all Indians. And this brings us directly to a really interesting point from your textbook, the Source A activity. Gandhi was super explicit here. He said Satyagraha is absolutely not a weapon of the weak. Actually, it's intense activity. He called it pure soul force. So why did Gandhi consider Satyagraha an active fight rather than just passive submission? Think about it. It's because resisting the urge to fight back physically requires immense mental strength, incredible discipline, and this active, relentless pursuit of truth. It's so much harder than just giving in to anger. It is, quite literally, active resistance of the soul. Now, after arriving in 1915, Gandhi didn't just immediately launch a giant national protest. He was strategic. He tested Satyagraha locally first. In 1917, he traveled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire peasants who were struggling against an incredibly oppressive plantation system. Then, in 1918, he went to Ahmedabad to organize a successful movement among cotton mill workers. Also in 1918, he threw his support behind the peasants of Kheda in Gujarat. These folks were hit hard by crop failure and a plague epidemic, and they simply couldn't pay their revenue. By successfully solving these local, real-world problems using nonviolence, Gandhi was gaining the absolute trust of the masses. He was building incredible momentum. Section 3. Rowlatt and Jallianwala, escalating conflict. Emboldened by all this local success, in 1919, Gandhi decided it was time to step it up. He launched a nationwide Satyagraha against the proposed Rowlatt Act. This act had been hurriedly passed by the Imperial Legislative Council, even though Indian members were massively opposed to it. And it was deeply, deeply unjust. It gave the British government enormous sweeping powers to repress political activities. Get this, it allowed them to detain political prisoners without trial for 2 full years. Just imagine being locked in a cell for 2 years without ever even seeing a judge. No way, right? So Gandhi called for nonviolent civil disobedience, starting with a hartal, a massive strike on April 6th. Alarmed by these huge rallies and strikes, the British clamped down hard. Local leaders were arrested, and martial law was imposed in places like Amritsar, with heavily armed troops patrolling the streets under the command of General Dyer. And all this tension finally reached a horrifying, tragic climax on April 13, 1919, at Jallianwala Bagh. A really large crowd had gathered in an enclosed ground in Amritsar. Sure, some were there to protest the government, but many, many others were just innocent villagers. They had come to attend the annual Baisakhi fair and were completely unaware that martial law had even been imposed. General Dyer entered the area, deliberately blocked the only exit points, and ordered his troops to open fire on the unarmed crowd. Hundreds of people were killed. Dyer's stated objective for doing this was horrifying. He said he wanted to produce a moral effect to create a feeling of terror and awe in the minds of the Satyagahis. It was a brutal, defining moment in Indian history that sent absolute shockwaves of anger across the entire nation. Section 4. Differing Rebellions and the Non-Cooperation Movement. Seeing all the furious violence spread after Jallianwala Bagh, Gandhi realized a crucial truth. A nationwide movement simply couldn't succeed without total Hindu-Muslim unity. This realization led him to support the Khilafat issue, joining forces with prominent Muslim leaders like Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. Together, they launched the massive non-cooperation movement in January 1921. The core idea of this movement was refusing to participate in British systems altogether. People surrendered their government titles. It's kind of like giving up your verified blue tick today, rejecting a system you no longer believe in. Thousands of students walked out of government schools, lawyers just stopped practicing, and people started burning imported foreign cloth in huge bonfires. It was a lot like organizing a mass boycott and deletion of a toxic app today. The urban middle class enthusiastically joined this phase, which ended up significantly crippling British economic interests. But here's a super crucial conceptual point, and you definitely want to understand this. The term Swaraj, or self-rule, it didn't mean the same thing to everyone. People interpreted it based on their own geography and struggles. In the countryside of Awadh, for example, peasants led by Baba Ramchandra were fighting against oppressive landlords demanding impossibly high rents. Down south in the Gudam Hills of Andhra Pradesh, tribals led by Alluri Sitarama Raju waged a militant guerrilla war against strict forest laws, which, by the way, actually went completely against Gandhi's strict rule of nonviolence. And over in Assam, plantation workers believed Swaraj meant finally getting land in their own home villages. They all invoked Gandhi's name, absolutely, but they completely reinterpreted the movement to solve their own specific local struggles. So let's connect this to a really important textbook activity. What actually happened to those Assam plantation workers? Well, under this super restrictive law called the Inland Emigration Act of 1859, they weren't legally allowed to leave the tea gardens. Defying this, thousands of them just packed up and headed home, fully believing that Gandhi Raj was coming. But tragically, they were stranded by a railway strike, caught by the police, and brutally beaten. Which brings up an important question. Can you think of other participants captured and put to death by the British? Alluri Sitarama Raju, for instance, who we just talked about. He was eventually captured and executed in 1924, and he became an absolute folk hero. These outcomes really highlight the immense life-or-death risks ordinary people took for this idea of freedom. Because the non-cooperation movement was being interpreted so differently, and often turning violent, it couldn't just keep going. In February 1922, at a place called Chari Chura in Gorakhpur, a peaceful demonstration in a local bazaar escalated into a terrible, violent clash with the police. As soon as Mahatma Gandhi heard that violence had broken out, he made a huge decision. He immediately called a total halt to the non-cooperation movement. He strongly felt that the Satyagrahis needed to be properly trained in nonviolence before they were truly ready for these massive nationwide struggles. Section 5. The Salt March begins and the demand for Purna Swaraj. We are now stepping into the final major push of this chapter. After years of internal debate and a global economic depression that hit Indian farmers incredibly hard, the Congress met in 1929 at the Lahore session under Jawaharlal Nehru, and they made a huge declaration. They demanded Purna Swaraj, meaning complete, total independence. To achieve this, Gandhi knew he needed a symbol, something that would resonate with absolutely everyone in the country. And he found it in the most ordinary, everyday item imaginable: salt. Gandhi declared that the British tax on salt and the government's strict monopoly over its production revealed the absolute most oppressive face of British rule. Why salt? Because it was an essential item of food consumed equally by the rich and the poor alike. Taxing something so basic was a deeply relatable injustice. It was literally the perfect unifying symbol. So, Gandhi makes his move. In January 1930, he sent a letter to Viceroy Erne. It wasn't just a letter, it was an ultimatum. The message was, meet our demands, or we are launching full-scale civil disobedience. Irwin flat out refused to negotiate, and so Gandhi started his legendary Salt March. Accompanied by 78 of his most trusted volunteers, he walked for 24 straight days, covering 240 miles, all the way from his ashram and Sabarmati to the Gujarati coastal town of Dandi. On April 6, 1930, and hey, that's a date you definitely want to anchor in your memory, he reached Dandi and ceremonially violated British law by manufacturing salt, just by boiling seawater. This single, highly publicized act was the exact spark that officially launched the Civil Disobedience Movement. Now, this right here is a massive conceptual hurdle for a lot of students, so let's clear it up. You have to understand the fundamental difference between these two huge movements. During the non-cooperation movement back in 1921, people were asked to simply refuse cooperation. Just don't go to their schools, don't buy their imported cloth. But now, in 1930, with the Civil Disobedience Movement, the strategy shifted. People were asked to actively break colonial laws. They literally manufactured salt, they protested right in front of government salt factories, and peasants actively refused to pay their revenue taxes. It was a massive, huge escalation in how they resisted.
Section 6. Limits of Civil Disobedience and Divisions in India.
But look, we have to view history objectively, right? The beautiful, abstract concept of Swaraj did not magically unite every single social group in India overnight. There were real divisions. For a long time, the Congress had largely ignored the Dalits, primarily because they feared offending conservative high-caste Hindus. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Classes Association in 1930, fiercely demanded reserved seats in educational councils and separate electorates. This actually led to a major clash with Gandhi, which ultimately resulted in a compromise known as the Pune Pact of 1932. On top of that, after the decline of the non-cooperation Khilafat movement, a very large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. They feared their culture and identity would be completely submerged as a minority. And finally, the industrial working classes largely stayed aloof from the protests, except in a few places like Nagpur, mostly because the Congress was seen as being too close to the wealthy industrial business owners. So there was this lingering atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between different communities that definitely limited a completely unified struggle. Which brings us perfectly to our final thought for this explainer. Just step back and look at the sheer incredible scope of this chapter. We started with the harsh, devastating economic realities of World War I. We followed Gandhi through the brilliant conceptual breakthroughs of Satyagraha. We witnessed the utter horrors of Jallianwala Bagh, and we tracked the rise of these massive, though sometimes fragmented movements like non-cooperation and civil disobedience. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. As we reflect on this incredible journey, how did the highly diverse, sometimes deeply conflicting voices of India, the peasants, the tribals, the factory workers, the different religious and social groups, ultimately manage to weave together to forge a single, independent nation? It's an unbelievable story of immense sacrifice, incredibly complex negotiation, and just pure, sheer resilience. Take this understanding, reflect on it, and I will see you all in the next explainer.